Hi, this is Carlos Cousins. This is a sentence completion question. For this sort of question, the first thing you want to do is, yes, make sure that you know the vocabulary in the answer choices, but also look for keywords in the sentence that might lead you to identify some trait that these pairs of vocab words in the answer choices have to share other than just making sense in their specific places in the sentence. So let's go ahead and look for any keywords together. Blank cannot replace blank data because this is one of the keywords I usually highlight in these videos, because that means that what follows because is going to have to provide a cause for what precedes it. So we're looking for a causal relationship between whatever clause here we make by using both these sentences, both of these vocab words that are going to be in the blanks of this clause, so that if we ask why why blank cannot replace blank data, the answer would be because an educated guess is never an adequate substitute for scientific observation. And this seems to be the only key thing to know about this problem, other than then, of course, the sentence making sense. Something here that we're using has to be able to replace something for it to remain a coherent sentence, so I'm just going to write coherence here. And let's go ahead and consider the answer choices now. Blank cannot replace blank data. Intuition cannot replace concise data, because an educated guess is never an adequate substitute for scientific observation. So this makes sense in that intuition should not be replacing data. The problem then is concise. Why exactly are we coming up with concise? This doesn't really keep the coherence in that intuition isn't something that you would necessarily associate with replacing a type of data, but data in general, unless, of course, there is something else in the paragraph that the sentence is placed in that leads us to assume that. But again, that'd be incurring an assumption, and that is something that we try to avoid for this sort of problem. So this doesn't make sense. Theory cannot replace postulated data, because an educated guess is never an adequate substitute for scientific observation. Again, postulated doesn't keep the coherence here, and that data is not something you postulate. Data is something that you observe and that you record. You would postulate a theory, however. So that doesn't make sense, because postulated is here referring to data, not the theory. Proliferation cannot replace prevalent data, because an educated guess is, again, this is coherence. Proliferation has nothing to do with replacing data that is prevalent. In fact, the only thing that you might assume proliferation is referring to is the proliferation of data itself. So that doesn't make sense at all. The proliferation meaning the spread of something. Conjecture cannot replace empirical data. So this makes sense already. The coherence is kept at least at the beginning, and let's see if it also satisfies the causal relationship. Conjecture is something that you come up with, something that is postulated by somebody's thinking or imagination. But that cannot replace empirical data, so data that is empirically observed, following the scientific method, of course, because an educated guess is never an adequate substitute for scientific observation. Well, yes, empirical data is another way of saying scientific observation, and an educated guess is another way of saying conjecture. So this seems to be the right answer. Let's go ahead and consider, why the last one doesn't make sense. Experimentation cannot replace nominal data. So again, there's a problem here in that this doesn't make sense, at the very least, because of the causal relationship. Experimentation is, in a way, very tied to the idea of scientific observation. But whatever nominal data means, and that's a very murky thing to try to consider, we're talking about data and no longer an educated guess. Also, if we thought that this was the right answer, that would invert the order here from educated guess and scientific observation if we try to keep a parallel structure on both sides of the sentence, if we divided it where because is located. So this definitely doesn't make sense either. I hope that helped with this problem. Happy prepping.